Hi, now we're going to talk about the updates in Game Center that we see in iOS 7. I'm not going to have a demo here because I really can't show you how to connect. I would need a full game with leaderboards and things like that. So I'm not going to show you that, but we are going to talk about what is new in Game Center and also where you can get more information about the new APIs within Game Center. So what's new? Well, first of all, you've probably already seen iOS 7's new Game Center interface. It's being shown at developer.apple.com and also within the documentation within Xcode. So it's a bubble-up type interface. It's very attractive, and it's a new user interface for the users to see. For the developers now, we have the ability to bring up Game Center within a game. While we're playing the game, we can bring up Game Center to do various functions. We have new support, and this is very exciting, for sets of scores within leaderboards. Previously, we were limited in the number of leaderboards we could have, and we couldn't have sets. We had a flat structure. Well, now we can have sets of leaderboard values, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. Another thing is that when we send leaderboard scores, we no longer have to cache them and send them all at once. We can send them as they become available, and they are just sent using a very simple API. We can now perform security audits in iTunes Connect. There's a little iTunes Connect sub-app that will potentially allow us to limit cheating in our games. We can audit for suspicious activity using things like score limits and so forth. And now, in the turn-based models in Game Center, players can now issue messages or challenges to other players, even if it's not their turn. So this is handled through a player-generated event, and a player is now can be registered as an event listener to listen for these types of events. So this is a different kind of way to provide different content. Players can now chat in the background, even if it's not their official turn. So accessing Game Center in the game is very simple. If we have a handler here called Show Game Center button, let's say, we can get the shared Game Center View Controller instance, and the Game Center View Controller is actually the Game Center interface, by just creating one, and it's the shared controller. There should be a space here between controller and shared controller. And then we set the Game Center delegate to self. So within the game controller that we're currently in, we're just getting a shared instance of that Game Center View Controller and setting its delegate to self so that it can handle messages that come back from the Game Center. We need to set the view state, and we use just GK here. We just use GK Game Center View Controller state default. There are other states. Please look at the documentation for those. Another thing that Apple suggests that we do is we throttle rendering back to help performance here. So that is done, just throttle rendering on this view controller. And then finally we show the controller. We present the view controller with an animated style. And we can also have a completion handler as a block that will execute when that game controller is dismissed. So it's very simple now to access Game Controller within an app. Leaderboard sets are something new. The previous versions of Game Center supported a maximum of 25 leaderboards, and there was no hierarchical organization. In other words, the leaderboards, you could have 25 of them, and you couldn't have leaderboards inside of other leaderboards. Now, in that flat organization that we just talked about, Game Center supports 100 leaderboards. If they're in a flat organization, or up to 500 leaderboards using a hierarchy of what we call leaderboard sets. Now, leaderboard sets are a way to divide up your scoring type content into, let's say, zones within a role-playing game, or different kinds of things that people will get scored for within some other game. It's a way to hierarchically divide up your sets of scores. You could count the number of monsters that a person killed in the entire set, but then you could count the kill count of each different type of monster in each different set using a different leaderboard within those sets. So there can be up to 100 leaderboard sets, and each of those can contain up to 100 leaderboards. However, the max total leaderboard count cannot exceed 500. So we can't have, let's say, 100 times 100 leaderboards, 100 leaderboards each in 100 sets. We can't do that. But we can have up to 500, organizing in up to 100 sets containing each up to 100 leaderboards. We set these up in iTunes Connect. Now, leaderboard sets have to be loaded into the app before they can be used. And so there's a kind of an interesting way we do this. There is a method of GK leaderboard set now called load leaderboard sets with completion handler. And we pass this in a block that takes an array and an error. And then that loaded set that we get there, we want to get the loaded set, and we take the first object, for instance, out of the leaderboard sets. Now, we can take any object. We can get each object, but we're getting an array of leaderboard sets, and then we can handle each one of those in any way we want. Now, here we're just getting the first object. Now we have a leaderboard set, and from that, we load leaderboards with a completion handler, and that completion handler actually does something with the set of leaderboards within the set of leaderboard sets. So it's a block inside a block. The first completion handler registers the second completion handler. The second completion handler fires. We exit out, or we drop out of that code, and then we drop out of the load leaderboard sets completion handler code, and we're all set. No pun intended. So that's about it. There's a lot of new stuff in the API, and there's too much to really go into in this presentation. There is no demo for this because, again, I would have to connect to Game Center and register my app in development with Game Center. Game Center app development is different. You have to actually register with a test server on the Apple side. So while you develop, you can't wait until your app is done to begin using Apple's Game Center API. Your app has to be developed with Game Center initially in mind. So for more information on this, see the documentation sets that exist at developerapple.com and or use the excellent documentation called the Game Center Programming Guide that is within Xcode in the documentation set. So here is the Game Center Programming Guide, which comes up with this screen about Game Center. And you can see that this guide is very lengthy and contains everything you pretty much would want to know about programming an application to interface with Game Center within iOS. Thank you very much.